I introduced Dr. Karl Giberson to you yesterday. He's the author of this remarkable book, The Wonder of the Universe. Now, Dr. Giberson is an experimental atomic physicist, and he's written 8 books. A 9th one is about to come out. He has a terrific reputation. He has been dedicated over the last 10 years plus to writing about the issue of faith and science and the convergence of the two. And some of you, I'm sure, have already read him. He co-authored a book here, The Language of Science and Faith, with Francis Collins, who headed up the Human Genome Project, as many of you know. He wrote a great book called The Language of God, right?
Yes. Which
I'm reading right now. So I'm reading Collins one day and reading you the next. How's that for a combination?
Well, that's a double whammy.
Double whammy. Yeah. Now, let's get into this a bit. Yesterday was sort of introductory. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 says, "Now we see through a glass darkly." And I think we all can relate to what he's saying. But how dark is the glass that science looks through?
Well, I would say the metaphor in science might be a little different. I think it's that each time we discover something and come to understand it, we see that clearly. But that understanding raises a new set of questions that then you have to go on and explore. And so it's not that we're always confused or always wandering about in the dark, but that we're always peeling this onion down and finding another layer. And as we go, we have an understanding of each step along the way. There's a wonderful quote from Isaac Newton where he was reflecting on his stature as a very famous scientist at the end of his life, and certainly probably the most knowledgeable scientific mind on the planet when he said these words. But he said something like this. He said, I don't know how I may appear to the world. And he was reflecting on this great stature that he had. But to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself every now and then and finding a prettier shell or a smoother pebble, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all unexplored before me. So I think that's a very good picture that kind of captures a lot about the scientific
absolutely.
method.
You know, when I read that in your book, I thought, boy, is that apropos? Now, I'm going to see if I can find it here. I'm sure I can. A quote from Albert Einstein, who, you know, more than perhaps any other scientist, impacted the 20th century at least. And E equals MC squared is still critical, right?
Well, I think most people know no formulas, but if they know one formula, that's it.
Yeah. Now here I'm thumbing through your book here, and what do you know? I can't find it. But what I found fascinating about the quote from Einstein was his reference to God and how he has created things. Now, was he just accommodating the conventional wisdom of his time, or did he actually have some kind of a belief in God?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion and analysis and even psychoanalysis of Einstein and his personal theology. As near as we can tell, he never entertained the idea of a personal God, at least not as an adult. But he did have a sense that there's something clearly transcendent behind the universe, that there's an amazing, comprehensible mystery there, and we can seek that out. And so he wasn't a strict reductionist who just believes that once we get everything down in our textbooks, we're kind of done, that there was a great mystery there.
There's a great antipathy, I have discovered, through interviewing people on both sides, between what's known as young earthers and old earthers among Christian scientists. The young earthers look at the Genesis account and see 7 days of creation, and that's what they see. The old earthers see, in many cases, a gap between Genesis 1 and 2, and factor in the age of the earth as we understand it, and say that you know, there's much more to the picture than meets the eye. And there's real strong feeling on both sides. I mean, I know this because I've interviewed both sides. And I get strong emails from people from both sides. I just as soon not get any friends, if you don't mind. I've had enough of them. But how do you understand this great divide between the old earthers and the young earthers, who are all Christians? Like, how do we resolve this?
Well, in part we need to look at that question historically, and when we do that, we discover that the emphasis on young Earth creation is actually very recent. I mean, we don't find that in the history of Christianity. I mean, St. Augustine, for example, 4th and 5th centuries, like, he didn't believe in the 7 days of creation. Thomas Aquinas probably believed it in the 13th century, but didn't think it was very important. The geologists who discovered that the Earth was very old in the 18th and 19th century, I mean, they were almost all Christians. They didn't think this was a big deal to kind of move past this. And so this was viewed by most Christians as just a part of the kind of common language of the Bible, a very interesting story that was intended to teach certain things, but not geology. And it wasn't until kind of the middle of the 20th century, when you get the young Earth creationist movement, that you have this intense insistence on reading Genesis literally. And I think the easiest way to see that is to go back and look at the books that were produced in the early part of the 20th century that were called the Fundamentals. And those are the books that gave fundamentalism its name. And those books do not promote young Earth creationism. I mean, they have a whole variety of different views there. And so the idea that this is somehow the authentic Christian position is actually very new.
The thing that concerns me, you know, and I hear from both sides. First of all, it happened before any of us were born. And if God is God, he can do whatever he wants to do. He can create the earth in 7 seconds. I mean,
Yes.
God being God. I mean, and whether or not the Genesis account gives all the details, to me, that's Genesis' decision. But what concerns me is that we can tend to look at things through our own lens, whatever lens we choose, and become almost sectarian, where we exclude the other point of view as dead wrong, and we see the other person almost as, if not an enemy, at least an adversary. And I wonder at this, and how do you feel about this? Like, when you encounter someone who doesn't agree with you, how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, it's a conversation that generates lots of heat and very little light. So it usually isn't helpful to engage somebody who is entrenched. My work has been as a college professor, and I'm very happy to report that I think hundreds and perhaps thousands of evangelical young people, Christian young people, have become comfortable with the idea that the earth is very old, the universe began with the Big Bang billions of years ago, and so on, before they dug in their heels on it. But if you have a 50-year-old Baptist pastor from rural Texas assaulting you via email and demanding that the president of your college fire you, which I've had on many occasions, there's no point getting into a conversation there. So you just sort of wish them well and sign your name in Christ and let that be the end of the conversation.
Yeah. Now, let's shift gears here. You're an evangelical Christian. You write from a perspective of belief in God. You write beautifully about the wonder of the universe, and I was totally engaged as I read your book. I read it from cover to cover. And now I want to start reading the books that you recommend in the bibliography. That'll take me a while, because you recommend a lot. But as a scientist, what is the greatest wonder of all from your perspective? I know this is an unfair question. There's so many wonders out there. But what is the thing that captures Karl Giberson's imagination more than anything when he looks at the universe?
Well, I think the most wonderful thing about the universe, and it's what I tried to bring to life in this book, is that grand story of how we get from the Big Bang to the present. And it's an amazing story that has all of these chapters that unfold one after the other, and we go from a universe which begins with no particles, just a burst of energy, and out of this burst of energy we get protons and electrons, and then they drop into orbits around each other, and we get atoms, and gravity tugs them together, and we get molecules, and gravity builds stars, and stars build up the periodic table of the elements, turning hydrogen into helium and carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and all the other materials that are so important for life. And then this amazing process happens that these life-giving chemicals that exist inside a star, where they could never be a part of anything that was alive, they explode out into the universe when a star goes supernova, and they spread this rich material into a big cloud, and planets like the Earth can be created by gravity out of this big cloud. And on planets like the Earth, we can have liquid water, and life can exist there, and so on. I mean, that is just an amazing narrative, and it's hard to kind of look at that and say, well, it's just kind of one random, meaningless, accidental event after the other. There just seems to be a story there, an amazing story.
Why are you a Christian? Why do you believe in Jesus?
Well, I mean, I don't have a very scientific answer to that.
I'm not looking for a scientific answer.
I was raised in a Baptist parsonage in rural New Brunswick.
Ah, another preacher's kid, huh?
Yeah, my dad was a Baptist minister, and I worshipped with good salt of the earth folk in the middle of potato fields in Carleton County, and I grew up in that environment, and although I've gone on to explore things far beyond the bounds of what we would talk about in those small churches, I've never wanted to kind of abandon Christianity at any point. I grew up, I was a biblical literalist, a young earth creationist, and I became convinced through my scientific studies that that wasn't a plausible viewpoint at all, and so I abandoned that, and I've kind of enlarged my worldview there. But I've never felt any need to kind of leave Christianity behind, and so I'm still comfortable calling myself a Christian, although some of the young earth people don't think I should use the label evangelical anymore.
Really?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of emails to that effect.
Just one more minute, if it's okay, Madam Producer. As you grow as a believer, I asked you about the greatest wonder of the universe from your perspective. What is the most fulfilling aspect of your faith in the Lord for you, just on a day-to-day basis?
I think the most fulfilling thing for me is the deep truth that I don't think we appreciate adequately, that when God was revealed in Jesus, that God was revealed as love. And I think the centrality of love in our world, in both making it possible for us to flourish, but also making it possible for us to find meaning. I think that, to me, just seems to be a constant surprise almost every day how important that is. And there were some people on the program recently from Africa, and I kind of, you think about like the need that we have to sort of care about each other and so on. I mean, that belief that we really need to view everyone as created in the image of God as being valuable. We need to love everyone and share resources, especially from the perspective of how rich we are here in the West. That I mean, for me, that's the central thing that I find so attractive about Christianity.
God is love, and in Him there is no darkness at all, as the Scripture says. This is the book, The Wonder of the Universe, Hints of God in Our Fine-Tuned World. The author is Dr. Karl W. Giberson, and it's a book that is available on the e-store. 1-800-265-3100 or crossroads.ca. Either coordinate will get you through to the e-store, and you can purchase a copy of this remarkable book. And it's, well, I've read every word, and I'll probably read it again. It's just a great perspective that I needed to apprise myself of. And I trust that as you continue to write, you'll continue to excel. All the best to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the show.
And we'll be back with more right after this, friends.